Greetings, listener, and welcome back to Dark and Disturbed Tales. I am your host for the evening, Steve Taylor. It's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. For some, that statement has a profound meaning. For others, it's a way of life. Join us as we learn what it means to be tested on tonight's episode of Dark and Disturbed Tales. So without further ado, I present to you The Last Ride, written by Leon Hamilton, narrated by Dan Monroe, from Movies, Music, and Monsters, featuring The Night Watcher, The Ghost of 94, and Olivia Steele.
Thunder rumbled through the night sky as the last bus of the evening passed through downtown. Just like every Thursday night before it, Mike and Vince sat in their seats watching the city roll by. The two didn't know one another, but had become friendly over the last few months of riding together. As usual, their driver, Mrs. Pearl, stopped at a gas station along her route. This stop had become such a regular thing that Mike and Vince barely noticed it. They often joked about her lottery tickets and Dr. Pepper habit, but all in all, they didn't mind the delay. As the doors shut, the rain began to fall, forcing Mrs. Pearl to hurry across the lot to the store. Watching her and shaking his head, Vince turned to say something to Mike, but he was asleep. Shrugging it off and pulling out his phone, he started going through his notifications. Just as he'd clicked an email, an emergency alert blared to life, taking over the screen. Before the warning beeps stopped, a loud buzzing sound filled the air. Then the entire city went black. It was as if everything, everywhere, stopped. Paralyzed by the sudden shift, Vince sat staring into the darkness till Mike woke up.
What the fuck just happened?
Snapping out of his daze, Vince blinked a few times and shook his head.
Oh, I don't know. Might be a blackout.
Pulling his own phone out and tapping the screen a few times, Mike cursed under his breath and then stood up.
What kind of blackout kills your phone and shuts off a bus? Nah, man. Something's up. Fuck this. I'll walk the rest of the way.
With that said, he headed for the exit and Vince followed. He didn't want to go out there, but it had to be better than waiting on an empty bus. Once they got the doors open, they stood, staring into the pouring rain. If it weren't for the occasional flashes of lightning, it would have been pitch black out there. Shaking his head, Mike sucked his teeth.
The store's a lot closer than my apartment. Oh well, at least there's a toilet.
Chuckling at his own joke and zipping up his jacket, he took a breath and then made a break for it. Vince watched till he nearly reached the building and then hurried out after him. The rain was coming down in sheets as the wind whipped through it, making it impossible to see. The short jog through the parking lot felt like it was taking forever. Vince swore he could hear whispers and see shapes moving in the darkness. By the time he'd reached the building, he was convinced something was about to grab him. As he raced through the entrance, a misstep caused him to trip on the doormat. Stumbling, he fell and slid for a second before coming to a stop. Laying there, Trying to catch his breath, he glanced over to see Mike standing near the counter looking confused. Pounding his fist on it, he shouted,
Hey! Anybody here? Hello?
The only response was a rumble of thunder and the sound of pouring rain. Getting up off the floor, Vince closed the door while Mike searched the store. After checking the back room, the freezers, and the restrooms, he came back scratching his head.
Where'd they go? I didn't see them leave, did you?
Still a little shell-shocked, Vince absently shook his head.
No, I didn't. Hey, do you hear that?
Listening intently, the two of them stood still. Slowly but surely, a faint sound began bleeding through the rain. A barely audible hum grew louder and louder till the two of them could feel it resonating through their bones. As the sound intensified, the walls shook and the windows rattled till items fell from the shelves. After a few seconds, the glass shattered and sections of the ceiling caved in. Panicking, Vince tried to run, but when he took a step, his legs gave out and he dropped to the floor. As he hit the ground, Mike glanced over at him and instantly regretted it. There was an odd pop at the base of his skull, followed by an intense numbing surging through his body. Mouth hanging open, he drooled on himself and then blinked a few times before falling face down. Once the two of them were out of commission, the hum slowly faded as the building collapsed, burying them. For a brief moment, both men found themselves suspended in infinite darkness. There was a calm in the void, a feeling of freedom, but it didn't last. The sensation of movement brought flashes of light, followed by the chime of a bell. Gasping in unison, the two of them sat up in their seats and looked around. They were back on the bus, which was currently coming to a stop in front of the gas station. Once the bus was parked, Mrs. Pearl put on the emergency flashers and then got up and stretched, turning to look at her passengers. She smiled.
All right, boys. You know the drill. I'll be right back. Sit tight.
Nodding dumbly, the two of them watched as she got off the bus and closed the doors. Just like before, as soon as the doors closed, it started raining and Mrs. Pearl hurried across the lot. Wide-eyed, Mike hopped up from his seat.
Holy shit! What the fuck was that? What the fuck was...
Before he could continue his rant, emergency alerts blared from their phones. Vince instantly knew what was about to happen, and on cue, the city went black.
Oh, no, not again. This ain't real. It can't be. I gotta be dreaming.
Staring out of the window and shaking his head, Mike scoffed.
If you're dreaming, then I'm dreaming, and we're both having the same damn dream. And that makes absolutely no fucking sense. We just died. Let that sink in. This ain't a fucking dream.
Then what is it? You explain it because I'm lost. I have no idea what's happening and I'm about 2 seconds away from losing my shit.
I don't know, but what I do know is it's not a...
If you say that word one more time, I swear to God I'm gonna punch you in the throat. I get it. We know what it's not. Can we move on?
Dream.
Putting his head down and closing his eyes, Vince chuckled.
Oh, you motherfucker. Whatever. I'm not going back in that store.
Mike agreed, then the two of them sort of laughed a little before going quiet. The sound of the rain thumping against the roof of the bus was almost hypnotic. The two of them stood silently for a long moment till Mike snapped out of it.
I don't know what you're gonna do, but I'm out.
Where are you gonna go? This doesn't seem like the type of thing you can just walk away from. How far do you think you're gonna get before something happens?
Irritated by the conversation, Mike frowned.
Out there or in here. Either way, I'm waiting for something to happen. I might as well make something happen and see how it goes. Besides, what makes you think sitting here's a good idea?
Bruce Lee.
What the fuck did you just say to me?
Bruce Lee says when you're trapped, don't panic. Conserve your energy. That way when something happens, you'll be able to do something about it.
Yeah, that's what I thought you said. I'm out. You can do whatever you want, fucker.
With that, Mike started towards the front of the bus. When he got to the exit and opened the doors, he looked back at Vince, shook his head, then stepped out into the rain. Standing in the downpour while looking up the block, he tried to gauge how far he could see. Between the darkness and the storm, his vision was limited. At best, he could see a few feet in front of him. Looking back at the bus one last time, he tightened his hood, then shrugged and started walking. Engulfed by darkness and being pelted by rain, he trudged along, occasionally bumping into things. After what felt like an hour, he'd reached an intersection. Stopping to look around, he paused when something caught his eye. There, in the middle of the road, was the only car he'd seen since getting off the bus. It was hard to make out at first, but once he spotted it, a wave of excitement rolled through him. Thinking it would be a good place to get out of the rain, he hurried over to get a look inside, but as he got closer, movement from in the car stopped him in his tracks. Using his hands to shield his eyes from the rain, he stooped over a little to get a clearer view. It was impossible to tell if it was a man or a woman, but whoever it was, they were fumbling with something. It wasn't till the figure brought its hands up that Mike realized what was happening. This person had a gun, and they were aiming it at him.
No, don't!
Was all he managed to say before a muzzle flash lit the interior of the car. In an instant, the window exploded outwards and Mike's head snapped back from the impact of a hollow-tip round as brain matter splattered out the back of his skull and his body dropped. He woke up, shouting,
Don't!
You all right?
How'd I get back here?
A little confused by the question, Vince shrugged.
You never left. You opened the door and stood there for a few minutes, then came back, sat down, and started yelling.
Getting up and pacing the aisle, Mike described what he'd been through, and when he was done, Vince smirked.
Look on the bright side. There's no hole in your head and you're dry. Could have been worse.
Pausing for a second, Mike stared at him blankly, then shook his head.
Bright side? I just died for the second time in 10 goddamn minutes. Somebody shot me in the fucking head. How are you so calm right now?
I'm a quick learner. Losing my shit didn't work out so well the first time, so I figured I'd sit still.
Like Bruce Lee, right?
With a smug smirk, Vince crossed his arms and leaned back in his seat as if his point had been proven. Grumbling to himself, Mike flopped down in the closest seat and closed his eyes.
This is insane. There has to be a reason this is happening.
Bingo, gringo. That right there is the million-dollar question. Why? Where were you coming from when this happened?
Thinking about the question, Mike sat silent for a moment. For some reason, the last thing he remembered was being at the bus stop. No matter how hard he tried, any memory beyond that was a blur. When he told Vince he didn't know, Vince laughed in disbelief.
Oh, come on. How do you not know where you're coming from? I was coming from... I can't remember. Shit, I mean, I know I ride this bus a lot, and we see each other all the time, right? I always see you when I'm on my way home.
Okay, smartass. Where's home?
Once again, Vince couldn't answer, and things got more confusing. Neither of them could remember where they were coming from or where they were going. All they knew for sure was that they'd been at a bus stop. For the next hour, they sat conjuring up possibilities. Everything from mass extinction to EMPs and alien invasions were discussed, but in the end, they were clueless. After the conversation died and the silence crept in, there was just them and the storm. Eventually, time seemed to lose its meaning. Minutes felt like hours, hours felt like days, and the rest was too much for their minds to process. Rumbling, thunder, and flashes of lightning faded into the background as the darkness took over. Mike believed Vince and his calm demeanor was a front. He knew what was happening. He was doing this. He had to be. That smug smirk and the way he never seemed to be shocked by anything was a dead giveaway. Sure, he pretended to be scared at first, but look at him now. Kicked back with his feet up like none of it mattered. Any second now, that asshole was gonna sit up and morph. He was gonna change into something hideous and come scrambling over the seats. Well, Mike wasn't gonna let that happen. The first chance he got, he was gonna go over there and stop him. He'd beat him to death if he had to, but there was no way he was letting this freak get the best of him. Pretending to doze off, Vince kept his eyes open just enough to watch Mike in his peripheral. Thanks to the flashes of lightning, he caught glimpses of him sitting in the back of the bus. It was hard to tell, but he could have sworn the guy was staring at him. Outside of the bus, he had no idea who Mike was. For all he knew, he was a serial hobo humper with a thing for dudes. Trying not to laugh, Vince shifted his position as another lightning strike lit the bus. What he saw made his heart drop. Mike wasn't at the back anymore. He'd moved up 2 rows and was definitely staring at him.
Everything all right back there?
There was no answer from the darkness, just a shuffling sound before more lightning exposed Mike's position. He'd moved up 2 more rows, and Vince could hear him breathing now. Quickly getting to his feet and scanning the darkness, he shouted,
Hey, what the fuck is wrong with...
His words were cut short by Mike, slamming into him. The two of them bounced off the back of a seat and crashed to the floor as a pair of rough hands wrapped around Vince's throat. Squirming under Mike's weight, Vince managed to get his left hand free and reach up. The moment his fingers touched flesh, he frantically clawed and scratched till he felt something. With his consciousness fading, Vince gripped the side of Mike's face and forced his thumb into his eye. As it sank in, there was a wet pop, forcing Mike to let go and retreat. Gulping in a mouthful of air, Vince gasped, then coughed as he rolled to his side. In the background, Mike's screaming and cursing mixed with the storm as Vince finally got to his feet. Wincing and rubbing his throat, he scanned the darkness as lightning illuminated everything around him. Mike had gone quiet, but that was okay. The bus wasn't that big. Catching a glimpse of a blood trail caused a crooked smirk to creep its way across his lips. Slowly moving through the bus, listening for movement, he spoke in an almost friendly tone.
What's the matter, buddy? Got something in your eye?
4 rows away, crouched between the seats, Mike tried to focus through the pain. It was hard enough to see with both eyes. Now that he only had one, he was basically blind, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. All he had to do was kill that asshole, and everything would hopefully go back to normal. As Vince's voice grew closer, Mike tensed from the adrenaline rush surging through his body. The storm became white noise, fading into the distance as his target came into view. Springing up from his hiding spot, he launched his attack with a heavy-handed haymaker that missed by a mile. Having one eye had ruined his depth perception and left him wide open for a vicious combination. A right cross followed by a shot to the gut set him up for the uppercut that put him flat on his back. In an instant, Vince was on him, raining down blows and laughing, but he'd made a mistake. Depth perception didn't matter up close, and Mike was about to prove it. All it took was one missed shot for him to turn his hips, shift his weight, and swipe right. The result was an open-handed smack that drove Vince's head into the hard plastic edge of a nearby seat. Not wasting a second, Mike unleashed a flurry of his own, pummeling Vince with blows to the face and neck. Doing his best to cover up, Vince waited for a chance to strike, and when a sloppy left missed, he struck. A headbutt to the center of Mike's face released a gush of blood, but it didn't stop him. Somehow he managed to hold on and retaliate with a headbutt of his own. The difference was when he made contact, he fell on top of Vince, pinning him to the floor. Rather than trying to get up, he turned his head a little and bit into his face. Vince howled in pain as Mike ripped the flesh of his cheek away. The overwhelming sensation of having a chunk of his face removed put him in flight mode. In his mind, this fight was over and he was getting out of there. Frantically crawling across the floor, he headed for the door, but Mike was on his feet and he had other plans. Spitting a mouthful of flesh and blood on the floor, Mike watched through his one good eye as Vince crawled away. This was it. All he had to do was end this piece of shit and he could go back to his life. Taking a deep breath and wiping his mouth, he moved in for the kill. When he caught up, the first thing he did was drive his heel down on Vince's left ankle. The meaty snap of bone halted all movement and filled the air with garbled screams. As he stepped over him to get to his head, he made sure to step on his hand and grind it into the floor. The moment he was in position, he stomped his head in. Surprisingly, it wasn't as easy as it looked in all the movies. He had to go at it for a while before the skull eventually split open. Exhausted and waiting for his reset, Mike opened the bus doors, then stepped out into the rain. Closing his eye and turning his face to the sky, he let the cold rain wash away the blood and soothe his aching muscles. After a long moment of silence, he brought his head down and looked around. Nothing had changed. He didn't understand. He'd done what he was supposed to do. Why was he still there? Speechless, he staggered off down the street, wondering what he'd done wrong. After a few seconds, a tingling sensation surged through his body, causing the hair on his arms to stand up. Slightly confused, his first reaction was to look at his arm, but as he brought it to eye level, there was an intense flash of light. For a brief moment, time stood still. Mike stared in amazement as bolts of electricity coming from his fingertips. In that same moment, there was an explosion of sound as a bolt of lightning arched down from the sky, hitting him on top of the head. The last thing he saw was his clothes bursting into flames before everything suddenly went black. The sound of a woman laughing and clapping her hands brought him out of the void. As his one good eye groggingly opened, he found himself back on the bus. Standing next to the driver's seat was Mrs. Pearl, smiling and shaking her head in disbelief.
I've been doing this for a long time, and I've seen some things. But you two, you guys win the prize. I've never seen anyone lose it that quick. Holy moly, that was exciting. Usually it takes a few cycles. And for some reason, you guys never seem to catch on. Would you believe a guy once tried 30 times before he gave up? 30! That's insane! Gotta be honest, though, I wasn't expecting you two to turn on each other so soon. I guess that's what you get when you put two psychopaths together. Or is it sociopaths? Nah, I'm no good with that type of stuff. Anyway, get comfy. It's gonna be a long trip.
A wet, squishing sound pulled Mike's attention over to his left. When he saw that it was, he froze. With a hole in his face and a cracked open skull, Vince sat staring back at him while globs of snot, brain fluid, and blood flowed from his nose.
What is this? Why am I here?
His questions received another round of laughter from Mrs. Pearl as she took her seat.
Oh, sweetie. You just don't get it. This is your punishment. His too, for that matter. The two of you have been on the boss's radar for a while now. I told him we shouldn't put serial killers together, but you know how it is. Budget cuts and layoffs mean we have to make do, so here we are. In any case, welcome to Gehenna, the city of darkness. You won't enjoy your stay.
As the bus's engine roared to life, both Mike and Vince finally understood. This was hell.
Well now, that was one hell of a ride. I think tonight's lesson is pay attention to your surroundings and remember, there's no such thing as a free ride. In life, or death. Also, you should choose wisely when making a career choice. Who knows where you might end up in the afterlife? If you like what you heard here tonight at Dark and Disturbed Tales, be sure and check out Beetle Fan Eyes' other audios. You won't be disappointed. If you liked our narrator, Dan Monroe, he has his own YouTube channel called Dan Monroe, Movies, Music, and Monsters. Voice talent The Ghost of 94 also has his own YouTube channel and can be found on YouTube at The Ghost of 94. If you liked Olivia Steele's performance, she can also be found on YouTube. Just search for Scarily Olivia. Well, friends, it is almost time for me to go. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me here at Dark and Disturbed Tales. I am your host, Steve Taylor. Until next time, may the darkness embrace you. Ha 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 ha.